So welcome back today to talk about Thomas Traherne and what a mysterious figure he is. You ever see the movie, what's it called, Amazing Grace, wherein what's his name, Rufus Sewell plays Thomas Clarkson, the abolitionist Quaker activist, and in the film he quotes a poem by Thomas Traherne, which must be a total fabrication because no one knew about the poetry of Thomas Traherne until the late 1800s, the very late 1800s, really not until the 1900s. And so, because what happened is Traherne was an Anglican priest, another one, another one who died young, at the age of 37 or so, in 1674 is when he died. And he published one book during his lifetime, which was actually a polemic against the Roman Catholic Church called Roman Forgeries. And it was probably his master's thesis, which was published. But he was not interested in publishing, but he was interested in writing. And he wrote much beautiful poetry and some wonderful prose. And the one we're going to look at in the next lecture is his Centuries of Meditations. But a mysterious poet. Nobody knows much about him. He did have a brother, and his brother held on to his manuscripts and actually had prepared one of his collection of poetry for publication, but never found its way into print. And then fast forward to 1896, when what's the guy's name? W.T. Brooke is at a flea market, essentially in London or someplace in England, and he buys this manuscript of poetry. Looks kind of interesting. Buys it for pennies. And which is why I'm wearing this vest right here today, because I bought this vest at a flea market in England about 30 years ago, and it was old when I bought it. So for some reason it's shrunk over the years. So he buys this manuscript of poetry, and he eventually hands it off to Alexander Grossart, who was another Anglican priest, but also a kind of famous literary scholar at the time. He put out a volume of poetry by 17th century poets, and Thomas Traherne's right in the ballpark. Now, Grossart thought that the manuscript was a collection of undiscovered poetry by Henry Vaughan. Now, well, it's the best he could guess, right? And because there were no names on the manuscript, nobody knew where it was from. There was no name. It was in most of the manuscript that I believe the one that Grossart looked at was in Thomas Traherne's own hand. So it's interesting, right? But and I guess I would assume that the reason he thought it belonged to Henry Vaughan, because it's different from other metaphysical poetry in that nature is a little bit more involved, but they are such different poets. One of the things you'll notice through the poetry of Traherne is, unlike Donne, who's so conscious of sin and of his possibility that he could be sinning at any moment, even by talking about not sinning, is he sinning? And similar with Herbert, who's so self-conscious and so scrupulous about his own sinfulness, which is why he's the 5 poems called Affliction. We see, of course, less of that in Crashaw, though it's still present, and less of that in Vaughan, but it's still present, right? But it's almost non-existent in Traherne. And interestingly, and you'll notice in the last lecture, at the close of the lecture, when I kind of gave a commercial for the coming events with Thomas Traherne, I said, how like an angel, or how like a child came I down, which is actually, I misspoke. But I didn't misspeak, because when I think of Thomas Traherne, I really think of how like a child came I down, because as we notice with all the the metaphysical poets, they have their themes, their things they come back to. Like we talked with Vaughan, it's going back to light, and with the polarities of light and matter, the light of the first day. Whereas in Herbert, it always comes back to grace, to being surprised by grace. But for Traherne, it's becoming a child, because unless you become his little child, you will never enter in the kingdom of heaven. And he took those words seriously. To go back to the story with Grossart. So Grossart thought it was Vaughan's, but it was not wrong. It was not Vaughan's. And it took, what's this guy? Bertram Dobell, who was another really fine scholar of the early 20th century. And he figured out that these poems belong to Thomas Traherne. And not long after this came out, and I think Dobell's version of Traherne came out in the first decade of the 1900s, I think. So pretty soon after the manuscript was discovered. Another one was discovered around the same time. And in the meantime, actually not until the last decade or so, maybe the last 15 years, more Traherne has been discovered, though it's only now being prepared for publication. I don't think it's out yet. I've been watching for it for a while. And of course, it'll be super expensive when it does, which is not fair. Academic publishers, unfortunately, try to capitalize on the library market, thinking libraries will have money to buy books. So they jack the prices up over $100 in American, which is highway robbery, when they can actually put these books out for far cheaper because of the luxury that we have now of print to order. They don't have to create big storehouses, but they're kind of using an older model of publishing, which is unfair, which is really unfair, because Traherne's the kind of poet, like Vaughan, all of the physical poets should be available, but they're not available. They're becoming more and more the province of the few, which is antithetical to everything they thought about their poetry. They didn't write just for the learned, for scholars, because that would be boring. But anyway, let's talk about these poems. And let's start. And if you noticed at the beginning of this video, I have an image of the poem that we'll do, Wonder. It's actually actually a photograph of the Thomas Traherne's manuscript in his handwriting. So that's what his handwriting looked like, and it's even charming, right? It's childlike in its beauty and its simplicity. Wonder. How like an angel came I down. How bright are all things here. When first among his works I did appear, oh, how their glory did me crown. The world resembled his eternity, in which my soul did walk, and everything that I did see did with me talk. Now this is almost like a précis or a synopsis of the work of Thomas Traherne, because this is what it's all about. How do we learn how to see the world? As a child will see the world, And of course, this is you would have to say almost a poetically imagined child, because not all children do this, but certainly many children do. I mean, it's not unknown to hear children say they could see angels or fairies, and I don't think they're lying all the time, right? And this is what Traherne is doing. He said, how do we get back into the garden? How do we get back into Eden? And because then when we get back into Eden, we see the glory of God. And now my own work, my own writing, this is what I call sophiology, right? How do you learn how to detect the glory of God in creation? How do you learn how to see reality for what reality is? In fact, to digress again, there's a film that came out. I'm filming this in 2019, just in the last month or so, a couple months, at Eternity's Gate, which is about Vincent van Gogh. And one of the things that Van Gogh character says in the film is he wants to learn. He doesn't think people know how to really see, and he feels it's his job to teach them how to see what's real. And that's what returns. That's what returns. It's what all these metaphysical poets are trying to show us how to see. Show us how to see. And that's what sociology is. And I'll just continue reading a little bit of this poem, just to work a little bit more with that. The skies in their magnificence, the lively, lovely air. Oh, how divine, how soft, how sweet, how fair. The stars did entertain my sense, and all the works of God so bright and pure, so rich and great did seem, as if they ever must endure in my esteem. A native health and innocence within my bones did grow, and while my God did all his glory show, I felt a vigor in my sense, that was all spirit. Our within did flow with seas of life like wine, and nothing in the world did know but 'twas divine. And that's it. We can stop right here. That's all you need to know about Thomas Traherne. Is he just is so enamored, and throughout so much of his writing, this is what he's trying to reiterate is this: we have to return to this vision of things. We have to see what's real. And he talks in the poem that precedes this in the manuscript and in most editions, the Salutation. He ends that poem with, "A stranger here strange things doth meet, strange glories see. Strange treasures lodged in this fair world appear, strange all and new to me. But that they mine should be, who nothing was, that strangest is of all brought to pass." Right? So let's look at another poem. Let's keep going here. Let's look at the Preparative. This actually comes right after, it's a couple poems after what we started with, Wonder. The Preparative. This is another where we find another one of his themes. In fact, I was just looking at this one line. I could do every poem in the book, right? In Innocence, the end of Innocence, and this is it. I must become a child again. That's it. Right? And the next one, the Preparative, this is another one of his themes. He starts, "My body being dead, my limbs unknown, before I skilled to prize those living stars mine eyes, before my tongue or cheeks were to me shown, before I knew my hands were mine, or that my sinews did my members join, whether neither nostril, foot, nor ear as yet was seen, or felt, or did appear, I was within a house I knew not, newly clothed with skin." Interesting, newly clothed with skin. Now, in the King James Bible, in the Genesis story, when Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, right, and Traherne's trying to get us back into the garden, when they're expelled, God makes them coats of skin, as it said in the translation in the King James Bible, which is also pretty close to the Hebrew. I don't know. I don't have the Hebrew off the top of my head, but the Hebrew, I checked out the translation when I don't know Hebrew, but the translation in the Hebrew is really coats of skin. Coats of skin. And what does that mean? Now, tradition, I guess, has said the skins of animals. That's not true at all. In fact, if you really read Genesis accurately, there are no animal sacrifices, and some would say no eating of meat until after the flood. So you get a few chapters before you can put on a coat of skin, because this would just be rude in Genesis, right now, when Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden. So my thought is that what's really being depicted here is that the state of humanity prior to the fall was not as incarnated in the flesh as now. I think there was an incarnation, but not as embodied as we are now. Participating in animal flesh. We could say that the fall caused humanity to fall into this body, in a way. And I don't mean to sound dualistic at all, and I don't mean that at all. But I do think this is what Traherne's talking about in this last line of the first stanza of the preparative. I was within a house I knew not, newly clothed with skin. Right? He's drawing on that anyway. In the next stanza, then was my soul my only all to me, a living endless I, just bounded with the sky, whose power, whose act, whose essence was to see, right? Whose essence is to see. Now, notice how he's punning on I, right, and I. He does it quite often. Most scholars haven't noticed this. I don't get it. It's so obvious to me, right? And then he says, whose essence was to see. So my essence is to see, just like the essence of my I is to see. So the essence of my I is to see, just as the essence of my I is to see. So it's a metaphor for the self, right? And he says here, right here, I was in an inward sphere of light, or an interminable orb of sight, an endless and a living day, a vital sun that round about did ray, all life, all sense, a naked, simple, pure intelligence. Now this, I think this is a very biblical thing that he's doing right here. He's drawing from Matthew 6:22, when Jesus says in the authorized version of King James translation, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. Right? Now, you could say Jesus too is speaking more metaphorically, not just of the eye, but of the eye. If you're single, it will be filled with light. Right? And this is, of course, the eye gets filled with light of the fourth day, but the eye gets filled with light of the first day. So it's really, and people try to downplay or dismiss Traherne as just, this poet of felicity, like he's Edward Guest or something. He is much too smart for this. He has a lot, I think, in common with the Cambridge Platonists, with some of them, if you know about them. I always been meaning for years to undertake an in-depth study of the Cambridge Platonists. I have a few books that I've read a lot, but I would love to get all of them, but they're so hard to come by. Most of them have not been in print for a long, long time, and so it's hard to really get a hold of that stuff, and I hate reading online. Otherwise, you can probably find a lot of the manuscripts through archive.org or EBO or some of these other databases. But I digress. So let's keep looking here through this poem, the preparative. On the fourth stanza, he keeps with this theme of sight. For sight inherits beauty, hearing sounds, the nostrils sweet perfumes, and all tastes have hidden rooms within the tongue, and feeling wounds with pleasure and delight. But I have forgot the rest, and was all sight or eye. Get the pun? He's spelling I, but I have forgot the rest, and was all sight or eye. Unbodied and devoid of care, just as in heaven the holy angels are, for simple sense is the Lord of all created excellence. Right? And in this, if you jump ahead to the sixth stanza, he says, "'Tis not the object, but the light that maketh heaven. 'Tis a pure sight felicity, appears to none but them that purely see." I just love. Well, with every one of these guys, I could go on for months talking about how cool this poem is. So you get it. These are two of his themes, right? Childhood, and becoming as a child to enter in the kingdom of heaven, and making the eye single so that thy body should be filled with light. And those are just things worth meditating on for a whole lifetime. Try how do you become as a little child again? Right? And I think this is why his poetry is not burdened with this depressive sense of sin. And you ever see Monty Python and the Holy Grail when God appears to the knights and they start groveling? Oh, I'm so sick of groveling. It's always, I'm sorry for this, forgive me for that. It's depressing. And I think that's Thomas Traherne would say, that's what I'm trying to tell you. Why don't you focus on what's beautiful? Make thine eye single. And this is some, like some observers think Traherne's not Christian enough. I think he's absolutely Christian. At least as far as in my sense of what it is to be a Christian. And now let's look at the improvement. This one, we'll have a lot to say about this. 'Tis more to recollect than make. The one is but an accident without the other. We cannot think the world to be the throne of God unless his wisdom shine as brother unto his power in the fabric, so that we the one may in the other know. His goodness also must in both appear, and all the children of his love be found, in the creation of the starry sphere and in the forming of the fruitful ground. Before we can that happiness descry, which is the daughter of the deity. His wisdom shines in spreading forth the sky, his powers great in ordering the sun. His goodness very marvelous and high appears, in every work his hand hath done. And all his works in their verity, united or asunder, please the eye. So in a way, you have in this poem those two themes we already talked about that are joining. And to them is joined another theme, which is the theme of wisdom, or the shining that he talks about, right? And they're certainly related to the theme of childhood and the theme of making the eye single. But I think also, when he says his wisdom shines in spreading forth the sky, this is an allusion to wisdom or Sophia in Proverbs and in the Book of Wisdom and in Sirach, in the Book of Sirach. Because and the thing is interesting that Sirach and the Book of Wisdom are not accepted parts of the Protestant canon of the Bible, but they are included as Apocrypha. And you'll notice that even Donne quotes a lot from those books. Not so much Herbert, and certainly Vaughan does as well, because I think what happens with some of these poets, and the ones that are certainly, if you notice this, with Vaughan and with Traherne, who are kind of plugged into nature in a way that is very foreign to Herbert and Donne. A big difference 40 years makes, 50 years makes between their births. And Traherne too, we talked about this with Vaughan, I think he also stumbled upon the writings of Jakob Burma, which I'm sure he would have found very congruent with his own feelings about things, especially when it comes to the creation and in the Virgin Sophia, which is wisdom shining through here, right? It's another thing, many scholars miss that too. I'm not saying they're not paying attention, but the thing is, in literary criticism, it depends on the critic, but people don't necessarily have awareness of Jakob Burma if they're studying Thomas Traherne. I mean, some people do, but generally speaking, no. So it's a good thing to know what was going on in culture at that time. And as we talked when we were talking about Vaughan, in 1648, Burma's works were all translated into English, which is that's a monumental undertaking. Or not in 48, but that's when they started to be translated, and so these disseminated through England, and you know, theologically interested, mystically inclined person like Thomas Traherne would have read it, and he would have said, "Yes, me too. Yeah, that's right." So if we go to stanza 5, he continues in this strain. His wisdom, goodness, power, as they unite all things in one, that they may be the treasures of one enjoyer, shine in the utmost height they can attain, and our most glorious pleasures, when all the universe conjoined in one exalts a creature, as if that alone. And if we skip down to number 7, is far more great than to create them. There where now they stand. His wisdom more doth shine, in that his might and goodness more appear in recollecting. He is more divine in making everything a gift to one, than in the several parts of all his wide throne. Right? His wisdom more doth shine. There goes. And this might be why Alexander Grosser interpreted this to be the work of Vaughan, because we saw that Vaughan also was interested in this shining idea, that all things shine, you know, and of course Thomas Vaughan as well was really interested in that idea. Let's continue along here. Well, I could do so many poems, I just could do them all. Let's take a look. Well, speaking about shining, in the poem Silence, which is very much a poem about contemplation, about the contemplative act, toward the end of the poem, though, he says, "A vast and infinite capacity did make my bosom like the deity, in whose mysterious and celestial mind all ages and all worlds together shined. Right? Who, though he nothing said, did always reign, and in himself eternity contain. The world was more in me than I in it. The King of glory in my soul did sit. And to himself in me he always gave, and that he takes delight to see me have. For so my spirit was an endless sphere, like God himself, and heaven and earth was there." For so my spirit was an endless sphere. Now, notice we encountered this notion in Donne's poetry. Let man's soul be a sphere. Now Donne, it's interesting with Donne, it's kind of a clever conceit, I think. Even though I think he certainly thinks there's truth in it, but I think with Traherne, it's like, no, this is how it is. My soul was an endless sphere, like God himself, and heaven and earth was there. Right? And he says earlier, right, all ages and all worlds together shined. Just lovely. Shining. I'm looking at my glosses in this book from when I taught it last time. It's shine. I'm writing in the margin. Shining, shine, shining, shine. Everything shine. Let's take a look at. I got them all marked here. There we go. Hello, dear Thomas. Here's another one of the theme that he often visits. I think more. We'll see that more in the Centuries. Is in his poem "The Person." Let's see if you can guess what he's doing. Right? "These sacred limbs a richer blazon I will lay on you than first I found, that like celestial kings ye might with ornaments of joy be always crowned. A deep vermilion on a red, on that scarlet I will lay. With gold I'll crown your head, which like the sun shall ray. With robes of glory and delight, I'll make you bright. Mistake me not, I do not mean to bring new robes, but to display the thing, nor paint, nor cloth, nor crown, nor add array, but glorify by taking all away. Interesting. Now, you also, I think, as we'll see when we do the centuries next time, I think a big part of Traherne's poetic project is a project of spiritual direction, and I think he wrote these for friends and for as he was a priest, for people he was counseling, as well as for himself, because you'll see throughout the centuries poems pepper, they kind of show up every while. Once in a while he'll throw a poem in there. And if we look at that as spiritual direction, whether that was his intention or not, it really is wonderful spiritual direction, right? So, right here, he's saying it's not the clothing, it's not crown, it's not rays. I'm going to glorify by taking away. So what's he do in the second stanza? The naked things are most sublime and brightest show, when they alone are seen. Men's hands, when angels' wings are truer wealth, even here below, for those but seem. Their worth they then do best reveal, when we all metaphors remove, for metaphors conceal, and only vapors prove. They best are blazoned when we see the anatomy, survey the skin, cut up the flesh, the veins unfold. The glory there remains, the muscles, fibers, arteries, and bones are better far than crowns and precious stones. So this you can see, just he goes right into the biology. And this is part of sophiology, is you look at how things are, how reality is structured, how biology, it's a miracle. The human body is, you always hear it's a miracle. It is a miracle. Gestation is a miracle. Conception is a miracle. I'm a beekeeper, and boy, you don't know what a miracle is. Hang around bees for a while. How does that happen? It's mysterious. It's a mystery. It really is a mystery. Just how does this hive? Whether you're using evolution as a explanation, it's mind blowing the way this community of the bees is structured, what they make, the incredible benefits of honey for health, and it's a natural preservative. If you had a jar of honey 10,000 years old, it would still be fine. You could still eat it because it's just a miracle. All the other miraculous things, the queen, the flight of the queen, all these that reveal the glory of God. This is the wisdom of God, which is disclosed through these things, and this is what Traherne is paying attention to in this poem. And in the last stanza of the person, he says, "Let verity be thy delight. Let me esteem true wealth far more than toys. Let sacred riches be, while falser treasures only seem my real joys. For golden chains and bracelets are but gilded manacles, whereby old Satan doth ensnare, allure, bewitch the eye." Get it? And he's saying this eye, but when he says bewitch the eye, he also means bewitch the eye. The gifts, O God, alone I'll prize. My tongue, my eyes, my cheeks, my lips, my ears, my hands, my feet. Their harmony is far more sweet, their beauty true. And these in all my ways shall themes become in organs of thy praise. You do it, brother. Now I want to look at just a section of the estate, which is what is our condition, what is our estate, and I want to go to. We could do 4 where he talks about alchemy, but we'll skip that. I want to take too much of it. But look at 5, section 5 of the estate, stanza 5. We plow the very skies as well as earth. The spacious seas are ours. The stars all gems excel. The air was made to please the souls of men. Devouring fire doth feed and quicken man's desire. The orb of light in its wide circuit moves. Corn for our food springs out of very mire. Our fences and fuel grows in woods and groves. Choice herbs, or he would say herbs, and flowers aspire to kiss our feet. Beasts court our loves. How glorious is man's estate, the laws of God, the works he did create. His ancient ways are his, and my estate. So this is our natural condition. And as my gloss says here from last time I taught it, pure sophiology. Now notice in the poem, he mentions all four elements. Earth, the spacious seas, or water, the air, and devouring fire. Earth, air, fire, and water. And the orb of light in its circuit moves, right? And that's the ether. And if we use the natural philosophy of his time, and actually a little bit before his time. And then, he just wants us. It's a poetry of felicity, of simplicity, but of also recognizing what the world is as it is, not as we have complicated it. I think he doesn't get into polemics too much after Roman forgeries, but you have to think with the enclosure laws. And if the enclosure laws in England, they gradually, from the time of Henry the Eighth, primarily Henry the Seventh onward, kind of threw more and more people off of the land, and eventually entirely off the land. This is after Thomas Traherne, in the 18th and early 19th centuries. So there were no more commons, where the commons were a kind of pasture land where everybody in the community would graze their animals. But what happened is Parliament eventually passed laws giving the commons to, guess what, rich people, and then they put up fences and threw the people off the common lands, and they had, where are you going to go? And they ended up going into the cities, which were filthy and, disease-ridden, and people were exposed to cholera, alcoholism out of despair, prostitution, which made, gonorrhea and syphilis rampant. It was disgusting what happened to people, but, they were unable to make a living. Not to go too far afield, but the poet John Clare, he was a victim of this. In fact, he eventually went crazy. He went mad. He thought it was Lord Byron. But people suggest the reason Clare lost his mind is because of the enclosure laws, and that because he was no longer able to make a living as a farm laborer, or at least not like he had been, he was so malnourished that it affected his mental health. And so what Traherne's doing here is trying to remind us how to be real, how to be human again. Because, and there's a lot in common, I think, with Traherne's vision and that of William Blake, who comes quite a bit later, about a little bit more than 100 years later. But he's also a poet of felicity, and trying, though Blake is more inclined to rail against the injustices he saw because of the mind-forged manacles, as he put it, right? We imprisoned ourselves, and we allow people to imprison us. So let's look at maybe one more poem, and then we'll continue next time. So let's take a look. The Recovery. To see us but receive is such a sight as makes his treasures infinite. Because his goodness doth possess in us his own and our own blessedness, Yea, more, his love doth take delight to make our glory infinite, our blessedness to see, is even to the deity of beatific vision. Let's read that again. Our blessedness to see is even to the deity of beatific vision. He attains his ends while we enjoy. In us he reigns. So lovely, huh? So that's what's being recovered. Is almost like when you would say when Adam walked with God as a friend, right? That's what Traherne's taking us back to. Our blessedness to see is even to the deity of beatific vision. So, and there's also this reciprocity, right? So we have a beatific vision, and we experience God, but he's saying that God also has a beatific vision, a divine vision, when he experiences us. St. Paul, I can't remember where he writes it, but he writes about this that God knows us by our love, which is a beautiful notion, right? There's a reciprocity. The Thomistic kind of idea that God is all self-contained, perfect, and whole. I never totally bought that. I mean, I get philosophically, conceptually, I see what they're talking about, but God is love, right? So you got to have something to love. There has to be an object for your love. And let's go to stanza 3. Let's do number 2 as well from the Recovery. For God enjoyed is all his end. Himself he then doth comprehend. Whoa, this is why it gets in trouble with the theologians. For God enjoyed is all his end. This flies in the face of Thomism right there. Himself he then doth comprehend. God understands himself when he is enjoyed by us. When he is blessed, magnified, extolled, exalted, praised, and glorified, honored, esteemed, beloved, enjoyed, admired, sanctified, obeyed, that is received. For he doth place his whole felicity in that, who is despised and defied, undefied, almost if once denied. In all his works and all his ways, we must his glory see and praise. Put that on my tombstone. In all his works and all his ways, we must his glory see and praise. You can stop right there. And since our pleasure is the end, we must his goodness and his love attend. If we despise his glorious works, such sin and mischief in it lurks, that they are all made vain, and this is even endless pain to him that sees it, whose diviner grief is here upon me without relief. All right, so that's a good. Let's stop with this. In all his works, in all his ways, we must his glory see and praise. Glory to God for all things. And this is not. You get this sense from Traherne, at least from reading these poems, from our kind of agapeic reading of him, that it's not just a conceptual thing. It's not like a Sunday school sermon, He's actually trying to get us to see reality, right? Because if we did learn how to see again, the eye did become single, and our whole bodies would become filled with light, we would see just like a child, right? The child, as Jesus talks about, right? Unless you become as a little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So in a way, Traherne, and I sincerely think this, is showing us the door to heaven. But we have to uncondition ourselves from the ways of seeing, and I think probably whether it's from our culture, from our horrible educations, which are so materialistic and deadening, from all kinds of things, we need to decondition ourselves and learn to see again. And that is Thomas Traherne's primary message. And it's a pity that he's not more regarded as a theologian. And it's a pity that he's dismissed as a kind of Pollyanna, because it's not what he is. Not at all. Oh, and I guess I'll just end with this couplet or so from Thoughts number 4. As tokens of his love, they all flow down. Their beauty, use, and worth the soul do crown. Men are like cherubims on either hand, whose flaming love by his command is made a sacrifice to ours, which streams throughout all worlds and fills them all with beams. We drink our fill and take their beauty in, while Jesus' blood refines the soul from sin. Right? And when he talks about sin, it's in passing. It's like, yeah, we need to get out of, and really the sin is not knowing how to see. And sin, yeah, we could say, in the same token, is what prevents us from seeing. But it's not. If we dwell in that, we're seeing that, Which, talk about Blake again, and they became what they beheld. If you obsess about sin, and this is, I think, happened with some quarters of the Catholic Church in the last 50 years or so, is they became what they beheld. They were so obsessed with sexual sin that they became what they beheld. Whereas Traherne's saying, yeah, I understand, sin's a bad thing. But the antidote is to learn how to see. So let's learn how to see with Thomas Traherne. And I'll just read it one more time. And we'll end with that. Because my wife recited this at dinner not too long ago for the kids, because I was going over poems that I knew by heart, that whether I learned as a kid or when I was a Waldorf teacher, I used to recite a lot of poetry with the children. But my wife rattled this one out, and the kids, the younger kids, were kind of, how like an angel came I down, how bright are all things here. When first among his works I did appear, oh, how their glory did me crown. The world resembled his eternity, in which my soul did walk, and everything that I did see